Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Comics Lair for our discussion of one of DC Comics' longest-running characters, Wonder Woman. We'll look at her career from the Golden Age to the Silver Screen. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. The Comics Lair is sponsored by Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. And I'd like to start by asking our panel to tell us a little bit about themselves and why they like Wonder Woman. David, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm David R. Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Binder novels, starting with White Trash Warlock as the first one, and my upcoming high fantasy Dark Moon Shallow Sea, all from Blackstone Publishing. I really love Diana because I grew up with her. I watched the show in the 70s and the early 80s on reruns with Linda Carter, of course, which I think was a lot of people's first exposure to the character. And then I got very lucky because my mom found packets of the George Perez run at Montgomery Ward's, when that was still a thing, on clearance. And she bought me the first 6 to 9 issues of the George Perez run after Crisis. So Diana's always just been this big part of my life. She's part of the reason I have a degree in history and literature and studied ancient mythology and Greek mythology especially. So big fan and just really excited to be here.
Okay. Barbara Ann?
I'm Barbara Ann Wright. I write LGBT sci-fi and fantasy for Bold Strokes Books. The reason why I love Wonder Woman so much is because she was one of my first comic book characters ever. And I was really tired of watching only guys save the day. So getting to finally see one of her comics and then getting to see the older show with Linda Carter was just such an important part of my childhood.
Okay. Ron?
Hi, my name is Ron Garner. I have written quite a few short stories in the speculative fiction genre. I used to run a publishing company of speculative fiction. Had great fun doing that. Currently, am working as an employee of the federal government. I am a retired lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. I love Diana for many of the reasons I think that David does. I think my history we're probably of an age, and so I think my history kind of mirrors his. I first read Wonder Woman in the George Perez run, and it just fascinated me. It made me, like David, want to study Greek mythology. I was a young teenager and just dove into Greek mythology because of that run, and then went back and looked at some of the earlier Wonder Woman stuff, and I've just loved watching the development of Wonder Woman since then. I started out as a huge Superman fan and always have been and continue to be. I have collected Superman comics my entire life. But I was really happy to discover Wonder Woman. I think she's such an interesting and nuanced character. And I think there's so much that we can learn from all of the Wonder Woman series about being an outsider and about dysfunctional families and how we survive in those, and on so many different things. So I think there's a lot to discuss there.
Okay, Fraser.
Wonder Woman was in the first comic book I ever read, which was a JLA issue back in the 60s. I didn't actually buy her books until I'll stop. Fraser Sherman, I write historical fantasy, some of it self-published, and also film reference books coming out from McFarland. In the early 70s, DC got the rights to Fafford and the Grey Mouser by Fritz Lieber. They had them guest star in an issue of Wonder Woman near the end of her depowered period, and I loved them, so I picked it up, and then I kept buying Wonder Woman, even though the next couple of years were one of the low periods in her history, although they did give us Nubia, the Black Wonder Woman, which was cool. But then she started to get good again, and I stuck with it, and I have a very long stretch, even longer now that there's so much in reprint. What I like about her, she is literally a strong female character in the sense of she can lift a tank and throw it a mile. She can run fast. She can tear through a vault door to get somebody who's trapped inside. She has weapons which are different from anybody else. She has the Amazon backstory, which makes her different. She's a princess. She has the Greek gods in her corner. And so that gives her a very different setup. It's not always used well, but she is pretty cool. And even when the stories are bad, I love the idea of her.
Well, those of you who've watched the Comics Lair before know that I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books, and I independently publish several subgenres of romance, and I collaborate with Jeannie Adams on the Outcast Station science fiction series. I discovered Wonder Woman, I think I was in grade school, is when I discovered the Justice League. And at that point, my main exposure to female characters had been Lois Lane and Lana Lang fighting over who was going to get to marry Superman or else what was his secret identity. And, that's just really not a good role model for little girls. So here came this woman who could hold her own in any situation and stood with the guys and punched as hard as they did. And she was awesome. So I really loved Wonder Woman from that point on. And I still love Wonder Woman. I haven't read the characters' adventures as faithfully as some of the people on the panel have. There was a period where it seemed like Wonder Woman was always being saved by Steve Trevor, and that just seemed backwards to me. That was a problem. But I think the character herself has so much potential, and with all the mythology behind her, she really has a more complex and a layered origin story than a lot of other characters do. So that's I guess that was in the Silver Age that I discovered Wonder Woman. So Wonder Woman didn't start in the Silver Age, of course. She started in the Golden Age. So if I say the phrase Golden Age Wonder Woman, what does that call to mind for you? Barbara Ann?
The images of her fighting Nazis and stuff in the tanks when she had the little skirt and the kind of poodle hairdo. Yeah, exactly, David. So I think that's what it comes to mind. More of a, I don't know, like when Bugs Bunny did all the Victory Garden cartoons and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely that image.
Okay, Ron?
It's so Golden Age Wonder Woman is kind of this interesting kind of dichotomy for me, right? So obviously the imagery that I get is exactly the same image kind of that Barbara Ann was talking about. But I look at the history of how that came to be, right? And of course the other thing that it brings up is the not so subtle bondage imagery of Wonder Woman in the Golden Age. But you look at the creative drive behind her, and you look at Marston, and I mean he was a man who was pulled by two kind of opposite poles, and I think that very clearly shows in the Golden Age Wonder Woman, right? Like on the one hand, he was very much influenced by the women's suffrage movement, and on the other hand, he was very much into kind of the pinup imagery, right? And I think that all kind of comes together in what you see in Wonder Woman, and things that seem like they don't necessarily go well together, right? Kind of all come together in that imagery, and so I always find that interesting. I find it's kind of a mixed up, messed up, imagery that doesn't necessarily agree with itself in a lot of ways, but also tells a story about the creators and the age in which they live. So I think that's kind of what I see when I see Golden Age Wonder Woman.
Okay, Fraser?
Spanking and bondage is the first thing that comes to mind because Marston was very big on both of those, and despite which there was a lot of other stuff. I also think of he had a really good villains lineup. There was Ares, Duke of Deception, the original cheat of the 1940s. His Dr. Psycho is a pissed off incel schemer before incels were a thing. He is a horrible misogynist monster. And that aspect was lost when George Perez introduced a later version, and that's one point where I think the Perez reboot fell down, because the original is such a vile woman hater and thereby an perfect foil for Wonder Woman. So those are the things I think of most.
David?
Well, I think everything everyone said. Of course, I had to delve into the history of how she was created, and Marston, who lived in a throuple situation, with his wife and their girlfriend. So it was just I think Ron really hits it on the head. All that psychology is what I think of first. But I do think there's a really important proto-feminist conversation happening around Diana in her origins. And again, when you look back at Greek mythology, the Maenads, for example, the followers of Dionysus who would tear men to pieces, that gave women in an oppressive Greek religious society an outlet. And I think Diana offers some version of that, right? Women can see, here's this strong woman who, tie men up. But I think one of the biggest things I see about Diana with the bondage aspect too is the rehabilitation. One of the things that I have truly always loved about Diana is that she ties up her enemies, she imprisons them, but she works towards rehabilitation in a way that I don't think anybody else does. I mean, Bruce throws them into Arkham, whatever, but I just think that's a really important part of so many of her villains. She's trying to make them better people. She's not just trying to beat them up.
Well, I really can't add much to what you all have said. I mean, the image that comes to mind for me is the bondage image. And then the origin story that they have to wear the bracelets as a reminder of how they let Heracles dupe them, and how man's world is kind of depicted as the source of all evil. But I don't think that's uniquely a Golden Age thing. I think that went up on into the Silver Age.
Can I add something in response to what David said?
Sure.
One of the things it's not just that she provides a very different role model for girls who are stuck with girl roles back then, but a running element is that Amazon training could make any of them strong and powerful and as good as at least an average Amazon. And that's a pretty radical statement for the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's also one of Donna Troy's many origin stories.
Yes.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to add anything to that before we move on?
I just want to kind of mention too the Trinity series that ran weekly for a year, when Harley and Holly from Catwoman's sidekick and Harley Quinn join. I hated the way that this got twisted around, but there were women's shelters that were opened all over the world to help women, and then if you did well there, you would actually get to go to Themyscira and become an Amazon. And I hated that ended up being, spoiler alert, a dupe from the New Gods, from Granny Goodness. It was an evil thing. And I hated that because I thought that was such a cool concept. It's like, man, I would love to see that be part of Diana's mission and mythos ongoing in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well, when I was preparing for this panel, I read the wiki entry on Comic Vine, and it said that after Marston left the book, market forces kind of pushed Wonder Woman from being so strongly feminist, although I don't think that was the term that was used then, to more of a traditional female character, more concerned with romance with Steve Trevor and that kind of thing. And I think that must have been before I started reading it, because then it said Bob Kanigher did the Wonder Family with Hippolyta and Wonder Woman and Wonder Tot, and I have no memory of that at all. Does anybody else remember that?
I am very familiar with those. Okay, first Robert Kanigher introduced stories of Wonder Woman as a teenager in response to fan requests. Then he did stories of her as a equivalent to Super Baby in Superman books as a Wonder Tot. And then, and I'm inclined to believe him because don't think he'd have come up with it on his own, readers said, well, could you have them all meet? And so Hippolyta, by virtue of, I guess, Amazon's Photoshop, combines footage of her daughter at different ages. And so she's able to show Wonder Tot, Wonder Girl, Wonder Woman, and Wonder Queen all going off and having adventures together. And eventually they stopped referencing that this was an imaginary story and treated it like it was real, which is probably where Teen Titans got the idea Donna Troy was a separate person. But for a while, this was like half of Wonder Woman's books were Wonder Family. And I think it's because how often do you get to see three superpowered sisters and their mother have adventures together?
Yeah, but I think you're absolutely right, Nancy, about about Marston, the effect of Marston leaving, right? Like Marston, I think, was consciously subversive, right? Like I think he was consciously seeking to be subversive in a patriarchal society. And I think that when that influence was gone, I think the market forces, of course, drove it into a more mainstream direction.
Yeah.
Also, I think Robert Kanigher was not inclined to the kind of feminist themes that Marston was. So once he was a writer, that was pretty much a given.
Yeah.
There's a movie out there, and I don't remember what the title of it is. I saw it on an airplane, so of course the sound quality was wonderful. But it was a movie about Marston and his wife and their partner. And it was interesting. And I sort of knew that about Marston in the back of my head, sort of vaguely was aware of it. But it was a really interesting movie. And so when this goes up, I will put the title of the movie in the comments so that if anybody wants to find it, they can. Sorry, I don't remember it. And
I think it's Professor Marston and the Wonder Women.
Well, there you go. Professor Marston and the Wonder Women.
I think that's the name of it. And I do remember that the girlfriend's name was Olive.
That's pretty good. I'm impressed because I was blank.
I wrote some papers on it in school, or not the movie, but the history. So,
well, there you go. One of the longest running characters in the Wonder Woman book is Steve Trevor. And Steve was her romantic interest. And then in the Perez era, he was more of a friend and a mentor and was actually romantically involved with Etta Candy. And in G. Willow Wilson's run a year or two back, they had a relationship, but they broke up because they couldn't make it work. So if you were in charge of Diana and Steve Trevor, where would you start? Ron?
I can be honest with you. I tend to think that that Wonder Woman is more interesting absent Steve Trevor. So I am not sure that I would have Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor, given my brothers. I certainly Steve Trevor can serve as an interesting foil to Wonder Woman, right? And can kind of serve to highlight her kind of outsider status, can highlight her status as someone who is unique and special. And I think that there are runs in which that has been done well, but there are a lot of characters whose interaction with her I like a lot better. So I probably wouldn't. I think Steve Trevor's kind of a crutch in a lot of storylines. So I'd probably go. I would more like to see. I more like to see the lines where she has intimate relationships and with not sexually intimate relationships, but intimate relationships with people who are kind of more damaged and who become a better reflection of her own background and her own love for other people and her love for human beings and that type of thing. So there are a lot of storylines where her interactions with Minerva, I think, are very, very poignant. And I love to see those. So that's a long way of saying I would not have a lot of interaction between Diana and Steve Trevor.
Fraser?
Trina Robbins, the comics artist, once described Steve as Wonder Woman's Lois Lane, the spunky love interest who's always getting into trouble and needed to be saved. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. I would like to use him not in that format, but I think he can be a good love interest for her. I know a lot of Steve Diana shippers like the fact that he is a military man, a tough guy, heroic, and he is willing to be in a relationship with a woman who is more powerful and more heroic than he will ever be. There is a late 40s Marston story where Steve briefly gains power, so he's stronger than she is, and she's intrigued at first. Then she tells him, no, I could never be in a relationship with a man who could dominate me. So he takes the advice that gave him the power and he smashes it, and that's it. And that's, I mean, I don't know how I would work with that because the chance of my writing Wonder Woman is nil, so I don't think about it much. But that kind of angle is what I would like to work with and bring to Steve because I think it's cool.
Okay. David? We can't hear.
Yeah, sorry, I had to hit the mute. I really liked how Greg Rucka took that in his second, more recent run, where Steve accepts the fact that Diana is stronger than him, and he calls out the toxic masculinity around people who think that she needs to be dominated or he has to be the man. There's a whole conversation happening right now in American society about men and women in partnerships and equality in partnerships. Like the recent study that came up of single mothers are happier than married mothers often because they don't feel like they have one less child to deal with. And I feel like there could be a really cool conversation around this of masculinity and feminism. So I think, and again, I liked what Rucka did with that. I'm kind of with Ron. I don't mind if Steve is regulated to a little bit more of a background character, a little bit more of a catalyst character. Doesn't need to be rescued every 5 minutes. That'd be cool. But I also like what Ron said. It made me think of the Nemesis romance that happened in the Alan Hydberg run and then carried over into the Jodi Picoult run. I thought that was kind of cool, where Diana was involved with a bit more of a bad boy and he was becoming a better person because of her. I thought that was a really cool touch.
Okay. Barbara Ann?
I would delve a lot more into her love life before she even met Steve. I don't think I'd cut him for good, but the fact that she'd never been in love before, especially when the movie came out and they kind of hinted at that, I was really like, she's been alive for thousands of years at this point. She's been in love before. So I think she would definitely have relationships on Themyscira and beyond. I think Steve is good as like, her first dude. But I don't know how long I'd make him stick around. I think their war romance is pretty good, but I would definitely not have her pine for the rest of her life.
Well, I have sort of a fondness for friends who used to be lovers stories. And so it would make sense to me if she and Steve were maybe involved after she brought him back, assuming we stay with the origin where he crashes on Themyscira and she comes back with him. But, very few people end up with their first loves. Some people do, but not a lot of people. And so I sort of like the idea of Steve being her friend. And, he's the guy she can talk to about stuff. And I've sometimes wondered if that's why Perez did what he did, was to take that whole Diana, Steve Trevor dynamic just off the table altogether. And so it opens up a new dimension for that relationship. And it's, I think there's potential there. And if you tie a character down, I mean, Superman and Lois Lane, okay, I'm not going to argue about that. But in general, when you put a character in a long running relationship for 80 years with one other character and it never breaks up, it gets kind of stale, I think. But while we're talking about Steve Trevor, who is your favorite Steve Trevor? Fraser?
You mean on screen?
Anywhere. Comics, on screen, on TV, in a game, anywhere.
I am thinking about that. I would say, okay, can I pause and come back to this? I have to think for a second.
Sure. David?
Well, it picks up on what you were just saying, Nancy. I really liked when, kind of what you were saying, when Steve was older than her. So when she came into Man's World, and I think that was the Perez run, Heinberg picked up on that a little bit at the start of his brief run, which was Steve, Steve was from World War II. Diana is immortal. I really like very similar, like when Steve Rogers came back and, Agent Carter is much, much older. There's a conversation there about what happens when somebody who can live forever or centuries dates somebody who's mortal and so much younger or so much older, ages so much more quickly. Is what I'm trying to say awkwardly. So I really liked that because it played on the friends aspect. I thought I agree with you. I really like those stories of people, becoming friends after they've fallen in love. And I wanted to quickly also just circle back and add on. Greg Rucka tried to give Diana a girlfriend in his first run, and editorial did. So they were working on confirming her bisexuality, and unfortunately, editorial nixed it.
Barbara Ann?
I will always have a soft spot for TV, Steve Trevor, with Linda Carter, even though there's a lot of problematic stuff in the whole show, and even though he was very, very dense occasionally with her identity. But I think, yeah, and kind of like Roger Moore is still my favorite Bond because I discovered him when it is a child. I think I'm gonna have to go with TV Steve.
Okay, Ron.
Yeah, so I think everything that I might have said has been said. So I will just pile on that I am, for all the reasons that he stated, I'm with David on the George Perez Steve. But I also will say that, like Barbara Ann, I have a soft spot for the TV show. And so that soft spot's never going to go away. And that is for the pretty much the entire cast of the TV show.
Fraser?
I was thinking about it and I think it's late 70s. Most of the 70s, Diana was suffering from a shifting series of creators. She was at various points space shuttle pilot, did multiple different jobs for the UN, shifted back to World War II in relation to the TV show. Steve Trevor died, came back, died again. End of the 70s, he comes back again and stuck. And for the rest of that run, they were together. Diana went back as Diana Prince into the military. And Steve was capable and competent. And they were a really good couple, partly because they had a lot of good creators working on the book. And so that was probably my favorite. It's generally a good era. And I think that would be my favorite time for Steve and Diana. No disrespect to the awesome Perez reboot intended. Yeah. I would also add George Perez's comment on lesbianism among the Amazons. I think I can get away with saying they have relationships with each other. They will kill me if I say they masturbate. And I think that is still true today, unfortunately.
Yeah, I go back to the era when the Comics Code Authority determined what could be in a book. And so there's a lot more freedom now than there was back then. But I have this loyalty to whatever I discovered first. And so the Steve in the comics seemed a little bit cardboard sometimes and lacking in depth. But I really liked Lyle Waggoner on the TV show. It's like my Trek will always be the original series. My Star Wars will always be what's now episode 4. And so it's Lyle Waggoner for me too. I have a whole bunch of questions here because I'm always terrified that I'm going to run out of questions and then we're going to be sitting here looking at each other. And obviously we're not going to get to them all. So do you all want to talk a little bit more about characters, or do you want to talk about storylines, or would you rather move on to the movies? Anybody have a preference? Well, if nobody has a preference, we'll talk a little bit more about characters and then we'll run into the movies. So Wonder Woman's family now is not the family that Fraser so kindly described for us. It's Donna Troy in whatever incarnation she is this week, Cassie Sandsmark, Yara Flor, Nubia. I think that's all of them. So do you like having that group? Do you feel it's used well? Do you feel it should be used more or less? What do you think, David?
So I'm a giant Donna stan. You should know that. Donna's my girl. But I thought Perez did a wonderful job with the Troya run on Titans, right? So kind of separating her, but keeping her origins close to Diana. So, and when Donna died, I was just freaking heartbroken. Like that whole Titans Young Justice graduation crossover just killed me. So I think Diana, again, Diana's power is shown in her relationship to characters. This is why other characters. So her family's got to be close to her and they've got to be contrast to her. I thought, again, the first Rucka run is probably my all-time favorite Diana run, because in some ways, Diana, while she's still the hero, she has the other characters around her acting as a reflection or catalyst to her. So you get to kind of see her through their eyes. And it also just reflects Diana's incredible capability for self-sacrifice when she goes up against Medusa, and she realizes there's no way to win this fight. But if she loses Medusa's focus on her, then Medusa with the TV cameras will petrify half the world. So Diana blinds herself. It's the only way, and sacrifices her sight. And when Athena comes to her later about this conversation to talk to her about it, Diana doesn't ask for her sight back. She asked for one of her people's children who had been petrified to be restored. That's the boon she asks for what she gives to Athena as a gift at the throne of Olympus. So that just shows you what Diana's capable of. So the fact that family, they need to be there and reflect her, but they can't be at her level. They need to give you a foil in a way to show you her heroism and what she's capable of for the people she loves.
Barbara Ann?
I have to admit, I haven't seen much of the more recent stuff. When I start to get really into a thing, I generally start at the beginning. So I love all the characters you named as they are so far, but I can't really comment on the real modern day iterations of them.
Okay, Ron?
Getting to the mute button there. So I once again find myself agreeing to a great extent with David on this. But in addition to that, I would say that when we talk about Wonder Woman's family, I love those characters. I love the way that they're using them, certainly. But when we talk about Wonder Woman's family, I also think to like the Azzarello run of Wonder Woman, right? And the way that we get to see the development of her family, of the gods as her family, right? Like I love that run. I love you can say what you will about the New 52. A lot of people don't really like the New 52 in general, but that run particularly, I think, is very good. And so they change the Wonder Woman backstory a little bit, right? She's no longer made from clay. She was told she was made from clay so that she wouldn't know that Zeus is her father. But then we get to see her relationship with the gods now that she knows that she is, at least a demigod. And we get to see some real development of characters that you don't normally think of as characters that develop, right? Through those relationships. So one of the one that I think of immediately when I think of that run is Ares, right? The beginning of the run, Ares shows up and he's the god of war, and he looks like the god of war. He's powerful and huge, and he's in armor. And by the end of the run, what you see is he's just tired, right? He's the weight of being the god of war has worn down on him for so long. He's just tired. And as you see him tired, they change the physical image of him, right? So now he's an older man who clearly looks like he's been bent by everything that he's experienced. And I think just to see that development through those familial relationships, that kind of development through those familiar relationships, I think is phenomenal. And again, it's kind of off to the side of what we think of when we think of Wonder Woman's family. But I also think it's important. And I also think it's a really interesting use of those relationships.
Fraser?
I am like Barbara Ann. I am not up on the current stuff. I know who Yara Flor is, but haven't seen anything with her. If they're doing right by Donna Troy, that's awesome, because she's a great character and has been buffeted a lot by the whims of creative teams. And Nubia, I'm delighted. I had always thought of her as one of those obscure Bronze Age characters who only people who are as old as me and were reading comics back then remember. I'm delighted to realize she has a fan base, though in hindsight, Black Wonder Woman would have a fan base. And I'm delighted that she's getting rediscovered and used again. So I don't know how well they're being used, but I'm glad they're on stage with her.
Well, I really enjoyed Stephanie Williams's Nubia and the Amazons series. And she's writing Nubia now. And I think she's doing a really good job fleshing out the characters. She brought back the Well of Souls from the Perez era, where the women who died by violence at the hands of men get a new chance at life as Amazons. And she took a character who had always seemed to be kind of flat to me and really gave her some depth and some layers. Donna, poor Donna. I mean, I don't know what they're gonna. I mean, I think she's mostly scenery in the Titans book and in the current Nightwing run. I'm hoping that's going to change, because the whole business about Donna being like a sister to Dick Grayson has just gone poof at some point, as things do. I would like to see more of a familial dynamic, because we all have birth families, which we might or might not be close to. And then we have families of the heart. And what I would like to see with Wonder Woman's Amazon sisters is a closeness that just that little bit brings them closer to her than the others are. And it's only a panel or two that it would take to do that, but I haven't seen it, although I will confess that I too am behind on my reading. The books are sitting here. I have not read them. So maybe they're doing that. I'm not highly confident, because they didn't seem to be moving in that direction in the first place. So I think at this point, unless anybody wants to add anything here.
Yeah, I do just have one thing that I'd like to add. I'm kind of this discussion brings me back to a point that Barbara Ann had early on. And I think that there's a lot of the development, that kind of familial development between Wonder Woman and her Amazon sisters, that I don't think we're allowed to see. And I think that probably is a result of an unwillingness to touch on relationships that people who are making decisions might not be willing to let us touch on, right? And I think that's a shame, because I think there's a rich set of relationships there that tell us who Diana is and how she got to be who she is. And I'd like to see that.
Okay. We know the Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy pairing is now very overt, but neither one of them is one of the top 3 characters at the company. And so I think maybe whoever makes these decisions in the editorial department feels that's less of a risk. If that doesn't work out, we're not going to torpedo one of our flagship characters. But it is a shame that we don't get that feeling. There was a little bit of it in the movie, but not in the book so far. So unless anybody has anything else to add, we'll move on to Fraser?
I'll say one thing. I think making her bi is cool, but I do wish DC and Marvel would make more of their established male characters gay or bi. It's always the really attractive women who turn out to have some degree of bi feeling, and it feels a bit too much like male fan service, and it would be more shocking if it was someone like Bruce or Oliver.
Well, I mean, there is Tim Drake now and Jonathan Kent. We do have 2 very high profile bi males, which I think is a big deal. So I just want to add that. I also just have to say, to Ron's thing, the Azzarello run, that art was so amazing and creepy. That take on Hades was chilling. The way that the art in that run worked, Hera and the peacocks, how they worked back to mythology and imagery. But yeah, I agree with you, Fraser. I wouldn't. It's interesting how you take when they do take a character like that, it's got to be John Kent, right? It has to be Tim. Yeah. It couldn't, it wouldn't be Dick, for example. It's got to be a B tier or a 3 tier. Marvel, though, Hercules has recently come out as bi and is in a relationship with Wonder Boy. Was that a Marvel Boy? Sorry, I'm getting my titles confused. But there's a little bit more movement in that front. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think they're ready to take the risk with somebody who's that canonically important.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the movies, and I'm going to start on this one with Barbara Ann. One of the things that a lot of Wonder Woman fandom was up in arms about, no pun intended, was Wonder Woman having a sword and a shield, and using them. How do you feel about that?
I was all for it. But then again, I'm usually for characters wielding swords in general. But I like that she had something like that. I like the symbolism of the shield, which is I think it's always been more she's a protector rather than somebody on the front lines. But I liked that addition, and that she can still be a protector and have this weapon. So because before I was always reminded of like the fact that the women's auxiliary corps in World War II like couldn't have weapons. Like it was actually at one point I think illegal for them to carry a gun. And I was like, that seems really dumb if you're going to send someone into enemy territory. Like they'd be like, oh well, I'm a nurse and I would help you, but I have this gun, and so I've got to use that. So I like this idea that it's like she can be all of these things. She can be everything. It's her moral center. It's who she is that guides what she does, not whether or not she put a sword in her hand.
Okay, Ron?
So I, like Barbara Ann, really like the fact that they gave her a sword and a shield, and not because I think that she needs a sword and a shield, right? Wonder Woman, in the modern sense, is, it is very similar to Superman in her power set. But because Wonder Woman comes from a Greek tradition, right? And Greek warriors, hoplites, would have carried short swords and shields. I understand why they couldn't give her a spear. That's probably a little bit much for TV, but I like the idea of hearkening back to her tradition. It's how she would have been trained, right? And I don't know why she wouldn't carry the symbols of her heritage and her training. So I really like it for those reasons.
Fraser?
I'm pretty neutral on it. She doesn't need it. I don't think it really adds that much. I am not wildly offended. I am more bugged by it in DC, where in the comics we get a lot of her using a sword, and various writers have tried to define her as warrior who wants to kill things more than she is a peacemaker and a disarmer, and that bugs me a lot. But in the movie, not so much.
Okay, Barbara Ann, did you want to add something to that? That was just an amen.
No, it's just more like what you're saying kind of thing.
Okay, David?
I agree with Fraser 100%. Especially got to remember, if you've seen the movie, the sword is a MacGuffin, right? It's a plot device, and so there's a whole reason she has that sword, and there's a reason she's carrying a sword, which is why it doesn't come up again in the second movie. She doesn't wield either, right? She's come into her full power. She doesn't need the shield, and of course, Batman versus Superman, when she first shows up, she's got the shield. But I do think Fraser's got it on the. Diana, to me, ultimately is what is the Amazon saying? Extend a hand in peace first before you extend a fist.
It's something like never kill when you can wound, never wound if you can subdue, never subdue if you can extend a hand. I think.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. But the whole Amazon ethos, especially from where Diana's coming from, is peacemaker first. Again, I'm all about her wanting to redeem her villains, wanting to rehabilitate people, to help them. And the fact that there's strength in that, even though it could be perceived as weak. I think you have to flip it in some ways, because the Diana of the movie is on the hero's journey. She ends alone. The Diana that Nancy, you're talking about with her family, is the heroine's journey, where she would end. And if you ever want to kind of understand the difference, I think everybody knows the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. Read Gail Carriger's book on the heroine's journey. It's like that thick. It'll take you a night. But the heroine's journey is the opposite. It's about building community and group and found family to solve the crisis. It's the opposite of the hero who, loses the mentor, which obviously you can take the movie and just track it right along the Joseph Campbell cycle, as you can for almost any movie for the last 30 years, and ends up alone. So Diana in the movie is a hero. Diana in the comics, at least if you go into many of her origins, is a heroine.
Well, I liked the sword because I don't know a lot about the Greek military, but they carried swords. I knew that. And I come to it from remembering the 1966 Batman when Yvonne Craig wasn't allowed to punch anybody.
Oh,
And so to me, letting Wonder Woman have a sword is kind of like taking off the now you can't punch anybody restriction and sort of saying she can do anything that the guys can do, which of course we knew anyway. But the sword was kind of a manifestation of that for me. Although she didn't use it in what is my favorite scene in the movie. And it has gone up there right with Superman's first night as my favorite movie scenes ever. And that's No Man's Land. She uses the shield in No Man's Land, not the sword. But I liked that. And I'd actually I've been saving Etta Candy for the movie discussion because I just thought Lucy Davis just knocked it out of the stratosphere as Etta Candy. But before we move on to Etta, what were your favorite scenes in the movie? Ron?
So I certainly, I think, I'm kind of with you, Wonder Woman in No Man's Land with the shield. I tell you this, the shield to me, among the things that Wonder Woman carries, the shield and the sword, the shield to me is particularly of importance, right? And I think to me reflects a lot of what Wonder Woman is about. Because if you think back to the way that hoplite armies worked, the shield wasn't about protecting yourself, right? The shield was about protecting the person next to you. And so that imagery of Wonder Woman with that shield is just incredibly powerful to me, and incredibly representative of what Wonder Woman is in the best of the Wonder Woman storylines.
Fraser?
No Man's Land is a good example. There are not really that much that stands out. It's generally a really good movie across the board. And so there was nothing, and I have this problem a lot when I'm talking about movies, there was nothing that made me say, yes, that was a money shot. There were a lot of money shots.
Okay, David?
I love the entire movie except for the CGI slugfest at the end. Like, they could have cut that by like 5 minutes and I would have been so much happier. That was the only part that bored. But No Man's Land, whenever I'm writing a book and I need to evoke certain emotions, I have like a playlist of scenes from movies or music. And when I need to evoke that heroic feeling of the heroes standing up and doing the thing, I watch the No Man's Land scene. Like, I could see it in my digital movie, like it's paused right after because I have to rewind to that. So that scene, the ice cream scene, it's just so cute when she's complimenting the ice cream vendor. It's just so adorable. And then I love everything on Paradise Island. I love all the gorgeous beach shots and the Amazons training, all of that. But I think my most favorite scene in the movie is the sex conversation with Steve on the boat. And the reason that I love that scene so much is because they ad-libbed that. Chris Pine and Gal Gadot ad-libbed that whole scene. It wasn't like they just kind of worked through it and it just came out so beautiful. It's just such a cute conversation between them where she's like, yeah, we decided men were kind of irrelevant. That was really nice.
Yeah, Barbara Ann?
Ditto to all that I've mentioned, and I'd like to add that the scenes with her and Etta, where she's trying on clothes and practicing kicks and things, and seeing just how this is like, no, this skirt won't work. I can't kick in this. And I've decided that's the way that I'm going to try on clothes from now on. Well,
in that scene, I really thought that Lucy Davis hit just the right note on that. And Diana's reactions, like to the corset, is this what you wear for armor? It was just so well written, the movie as a whole. And I really liked the way Steve was informing Diana about what the world is like, but he was never condescending and he was never patronizing. And the scene in the alley when she stops the bullet and takes charge, and he's like, whoa, even though he just saw my other favorite scene in the movie when the Amazons charge in against the Nazis. I mean, I look at that and I think of Robin Wright in The Princess Bride And then I think of her as Antiope leading the Amazons into battle against the Nazis. And it's just, I mean, I guess that's why they call it acting, but it was like night and day. And that is one of my favorite scenes because we hear a lot about the Amazons having warrior training. And we saw this great scene where they were being trained. And then we got to see it all put into action. And I just, man, I love it. I saw that movie 3 times in the theater and I would have seen it again, except they released it on DVD and took it out of the theaters, which made me mad. So, yeah. Does anybody want to add anything about original Wonder Woman before we move on to, well, actually, let's talk about Etta. Does anybody have anything to add to Etta?
I
In
loved
the
Etta.
movie or generally?
Oh, sorry, Frederick. Go ahead.
Well, either way, generally or in the movie.
Okay, I'll let him go first. I do want to say something about Etta, but
Okay.
I've always loved Etta. I remember Etta's extended family, like Mint, right? Mint candy, and she's got all this. She's got her own whole Etta family out there, and I'd like the chance to do something with some of those someday. But I thought the actress did a great job, and she was one of the main reasons I watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and she absolutely killed it in there as well as Hilda. So that actress just has so much range, but her take on Etta was just perfect.
Barbara Ann, Ron, you want to add anything? Okay. Well, then let's take a deep breath and move to Wonder Woman 1984.
can I say something about Etta first?
Absolutely.
A while back, I got the first 2 Golden Age omnibuses from DC, the big hardbacks. And that's the first time I've read like a huge amount of William Marston. And I was really amazed. Etta can fight. She is very tough. She never hesitates to get into the middle of the danger. And if it comes down to mano a mano, she can beat up a guy pretty handily. So my regard for her went way up.
Okay, well, that's good to know because
Yes.
how old are they? When did those omnibuses come out? Are they fairly recent?
I am not sure because I didn't get them immediately.
Okay. Because it's hard to find the Golden Age stuff. Occasionally you can find a reprint of it, but if they're issuing omnibuses, that's great.
Yeah, I think they're still available on Amazon.
Okay. Wonder Woman 1984.
Oy.
Yes. I've sort of forgotten where I started last time. So I think did Barbara Ann, did I start with you last time? Do you remember?
I don't know, but I think I went not too long ago, so feel free to ask somebody else.
All right. Ron, what did you like about the movie?
So I'll be honest with you. I have only watched Wonder Woman 1984 once. So I don't remember a whole lot about it, mostly because I really didn't like it. So I have not I don't remember a whole bunch about it. What I do remember was that so I can start out with what I don't like. The trailer was very good. My wife is downstairs and she just heard what I was saying and said the trailer was really good. And I would say the trailer was really good. Interestingly, a lot of Wonder Woman 1984 was filmed about 2 miles away from our house, at the Landmark Mall here in Alexandria. So that was fun. I did see Gal Gadot in Whole Foods once, so there's that. So that was pretty interesting. What I really didn't like more than anything, and there was a lot about that movie I didn't like. I like Pedro Pascal as an actor. I really did not like him as an actor in this movie. And there are movies that I watch and I think I don't know how they managed to get that bad a performance out of that good an actor. And that maybe itself is a real directing talent. But this is one of those movies. I don't know how they managed to get that bad a performance out of that good an actor. I can't really point to one thing specifically that I really liked about this movie. I didn't like them bringing Steve back. That I thought was fairly problematic. I'm searching.
Well, and that's such a contrast to the discussion we just had about the other movie, where we could all say, "Oh, I like this and I like that," and "Oh, yeah, you're right, that was great." And I don't see anybody going, "Give me a turn to talk. I know lots good to say about it." Now, if you do, that's okay. I don't mean to preempt you.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to somebody else who may have good things to say about the movie, because I don't want to be a downer and just talk about all of the bad things that or the things that I don't personally like.
Okay. Fraser, you want to take a stab at it?
There are 3 things I like. One, and I write historical fantasy, so I take an interest in historical scene setting, and the early 1984 scenes were delightful. 2, Kirsten Wiig is incredibly cute and charming. Unfortunately, since she is supposed to be a mousy drone that nobody pays any attention to whatsoever, this did not really work. And 3, I like the fact that this could have been a really awesome season of the CW Wonder Woman series, because they had that much plot in it. When you squeeze it down to a 2-hour movie with the cheetah and with Pedro Pascal and everything that was, and Steve and everything that was going on, you get a train wreck. So yeah, my liking is praising with faint damns, as they say.
Okay, David?
I loved it. I'm the only person I know who just absolutely freaking loved it. I will admit the whole problematic consent issue around Steve and what's happening there, completely agree with that. That writing could have used some help. There was, if anybody watched Glow, I thought one of the actors from that would have been a better fit for Cheetah, but I get what you're saying there, Fraser. Like, I understand all the criticism, but I just went into this movie and felt like a 10-year-old again, and it felt like a comic book. It was bright and colorful, and partly I was a kid in 1984, and it looked like the 80s. It felt and sounded like the 80s. The whole joke about the trash can, where Steve's like, "What's that? Is that art?" She's like, "No, that's a trash can." Like, it just reminded me so much of that era. And I loved the end. I love the fact that in order to save the day, again, and this could be a little bit of why the writing felt so inconsistent, in order to save the world, Diana has to appeal to the world, and the world has to agree to give up their things, and they do. Humanity comes together for a second, reverses their horrible wishes, and puts everything right again, and that allows us to save the day. There are beats I would have changed. There's a lot of things I would have altered in the script personally, but the whole opening sequence in the mall with the little girl and the big grin to see a female superhero, I freaking love this movie.
Okay. Barbara.
Oh, learning to
go
fly.
ahead.
When she learns to fly, that whole sequence of teaching herself to lasso until she, we've seen that with Superman like 50 times. Got to see Diana learn to fly under her own power. What a cool sequence that was.
I agree. I liked it too, because I will take just about anything Wonder Woman. And the scene of her fighting in the mall, the scene of her fighting in the White House, those I love to see her fight in any way, shape, or form. There was a lot I thought that was silly, and I didn't actually realize how a lot of the plot went unexplained until I watched it with my mom, who knows absolutely nothing about Wonder Woman, and who was like, "Why is that happening? But why is that happening?" And then I was like, "Wow, they really could have explained a lot about like Barbara's journey." Like what she's giving up in order to get her power, because it was like, oh, she's trading her humanity for her power. And I thought they could have gone into that a whole lot more. I didn't like the 2-villain approach, but I know why they did it. And I like the fact too that the humanity decides it's going to be cool. As much as everybody was like, "Oh, that would never happen," I'm still like, yeah, but it made for cool viewing. And then the flying too. I thought that was great. But I try to find a lot of things to likable about anything Wonder Woman.
Well, and I also liked the scene. I thought it was well done, where Diana is introducing Steve to the 1980s, because it kind of mirrors Steve introducing Diana to World War I London. And I thought the actors did a great job. But that whole thing about it's magic. You don't have to put Steve in somebody else's body for it to be magic and Steve to come back. And that whole thing was such a big squick out factor for me that I just couldn't get past it. And I think that's probably my biggest problem with the movie. I had some problems with the story, but once they did that, I was just kind of like, really? You're actually going to go there? And it just kind of spoiled it for me from that point on. And, I used to be a criminal defense attorney for about a year. I was happy to leave that job behind. But when they go into the Smithsonian to steal the fighter jet and Diana opens the door by swiping her ID, it's like, are they not going to know you did that? Are you not worried about that at all? And apparently not. But I thought the actors were really good. And I like Chris Pine's Steve Trevor. I like him much better as Steve Trevor than I do as Captain Kirk. And I think that maybe is a function of the writing of the two different characters rather than anything about Chris Pine inherently. But I just felt like it was such an opportunity that was just not capitalized on. And I loved the Themyscira parts. I loved that. That little kid who plays young Diana, I guess she's not so little anymore, but she is just, I just adore her. She's just great, I think. And I read that she took her money from the first movie and bought herself a horse. So There you go. She got something good out of it. Does anybody want to add anything about Wonder Woman before, in any version, any era, before we close out? No?
I'd like to say William Messner Loebs, who followed on George Perez, his era does not get enough credit. He is very funny, does a very good job showing Wonder Woman as somebody who looks out for everybody, even her enemies, and I had a delightful time rereading that a while back.
Okay. Anybody else?
I just have to agree with Fraser. That's a great run. I agree it doesn't get enough praise because I think it was, following Perez is a really tough act, but I think it's a great run.
Okay. Well, before we close it down, would each of you tell people where they can find information about your work and how they can connect with you on social media? Fraser, will you start?
Yes, I will. You can find me at FraserSherman.com. That's FRASER. I've been rereading and blogging about Wonder Woman since about 2014. You'll find them in the list of topics on the right. You can also find my books at Amazon, and I'm Bogatir5 on Twitter, where I still am, because I can still insult right-wing people.
Well, okay then, David.
I feel like I need to have coffee with Ron and Fraser, and I know I get to have coffee with Barbara and Nancy soon, so I'm excited. The easiest place to find me is just davidarslayton.com. You just Google it, just put the R in, otherwise you get some Florida man types. Like Fraser, I'm still on Twitter as long as it holds together. You can find me on TikTok, though I'm still learning because, I'm not good at dancing and I'm not that funny. You can find any of my books anywhere. Just, again, search davidarslayton.com.
Okay. Barbara Ann?
You can find all of my books on anywhere books are sold, but you get great coupons at boldstrokesbooks.com, which is my publisher. You can find me at barbaraannwright.com or any of the social medias except for TikTok because I never learned how to use it.
Okay, Ron?
So it has been a while since I have written anything and been involved in any writing projects. Mostly right now, I am involved in converting a school bus into an RV. And that is pretty much consuming my life and has for about the last year and a half. But if you would like to watch someone converting an RV and messing up and having to go back and do it again and again, you can go find Ron Converts a Schoolie out on Instagram, and you can see all the video you want to of somebody screwing up repeatedly.
Okay. Well, you can find me here at ConTinual. I'm usually in the comics lair. My website is nancynorthcott.com, and my information about my books is there. I, too, am still on Twitter because if I leave it, I'll lose track of all the comic book people I've connected with there. So on Twitter, where I spend more time than is probably good for me, I'm at Nancy Northcott. I have a Facebook author page. I don't know how to use it since Facebook changed everything. I have an Instagram page. They won't let me put my name on it. So it's hard for people to find it, or maybe I'm just not doing it right. But anyway, my website and Twitter are the main ways to get in touch with me. And I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for joining this discussion. And thank you to everyone who's watching. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find and Heroes Convention. For more information about them, visit heroesonline.com.